Hi, everybody. My name is Boyd Wagner. I am happy to be here moderating this lovely event hosted by TEPSA today. First off, I apologize. I saw on the schedule that Maeve McMahon moderated the earlier event, my dear friend and colleague. So I apologize to everyone here because I wish I would have gone before her. She's one of the best moderators that there possibly could be in Brussels. So it's not great for me, but I'm still happy to be here with everyone. Today we have a lovely panel of folks that are going to be discussing disinformation in elections. And I think more important with some of the fine minds that we have up here are some of the solutions that we can come about for combating misinformation in elections and elections interference in general. So I really hope that you guys can learn a lot of information from these folks up here today. I will do my best to try to navigate this very, very tricky subject that has a lot of layers and a lot of tentacles that go about with it. So without farther ado, I'll introduce each of them. Sitting directly to my right is Sarah Onborg. She is a press officer and head of the, you are head of the information integrity and, you're head of the information integrity team for EU Parliament. Sarah is a late addition to our team here, but we are very thrilled that she is. Then next to Sarah, we have Ben Graham-Jones, who is a consultant in emerging threats to democracy integrity. Ben, as a consultant, has been focused on emerging challenges to election integrity and has a substantial background in election observation, social media analysis, and online campaign analysis. To the right of Ben, we have Jonas. Jonas, give me your last name before I butcher it for the crowd. I'm American. We do not do names like this very well. Jonas Siravaca is a researcher at the Institute of International Relations with Prague. He's a PhD and more or less is our expert on Russia today. Through his work at Prague University Studies Institute, Jonas is also a program manager who focuses on disinformation and strategic communications. And lastly, at the end here, we have Fova Manin, who is a policy officer with EEAS through the Information Integrity and Countering Foreign Interference, Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Division, FIMI. She's a policy officer. She works in basically studying disinformation studies and through international partnerships. She's previously worked with the European Commission on focusing on media policies. She also holds a law degree from the University of Bologna, so I'm up here with people who are way out of my league in terms of understanding some of these concepts. Just to give everyone a little bit of an idea of how we're going to structure things today, I'm going to go ahead and lay out a little bit of context. Usually I've spent more time on this end of a panel before, so I want to lay out a little bit of context for some of the issues that we're looking at from the historical perspective, especially a recent historical perspective of how election interference is operated, specifically within Europe and the European Union, but we'll also kind of venture out to some other Western democracies, including my own. Then I want to be able to give time that I wanted to situate this a bit as a roundtable discussion almost, so that we could have a little bit of back and forth between these fine experts up here as we kind of navigate through a couple of subjects. But before that, I would hope that, oh, and then of course, lastly, I'm going to make sure I leave, and I'm going to set an alarm here on my iPad that I'll leave about 15-20 minutes at the end of the panel so that you guys can all have a Q&A with them and ask any questions that I have avoided up here. So with that said, I would like each of them to kind of start out this panel by, after I kind of go through a few things here, I wanted them to go through some of their work, what their focus has been, what their findings have been, and then anything that we want to clear up after, we'll clear up in the roundtable portion of the discussion. So with that said, I think that a large portion of our discussion today is going to be focused, of course, on Russia. They have been the #1 bad actor in terms of misinformation and hampering election integrity throughout the Western world over the past decade. And I will allow our resident historian to maybe track back farther, if we will, and to determine how we came about with this problem. I want to touch on some of the more recent elections where this has been seen and some of the programs that have been set up, whether it's the Social Design Agency of Russia, which has been a major component within the disinformation sphere. I want to be able to look at Operation Doppelganger, which has been operating since about 2022 as far as we're knowledgeable, and has operated through many of the West's most important elections throughout the US, through Germany, and France, and with the EU elections as well. And I think two of our panelists up here are going to talk a little bit about some of the findings that have occurred following EU elections in 2024. And then also I want to be able to touch on a little bit of the really the key point of the Romanian presidential election at the end of 2024. That was obviously a major topic. It permeated all media throughout the West. It was a big topic of ours, a discussion in America as well, and really touches to the impact that election had through the discourse of misinformation. So I want to be able to make sure that everyone has a broad understanding of what exactly happened there as well. Those are some of the key points that we're going to be touching on today. So without further ado, I want to pass it over. I'll start at the far end with Ms. Manin. Tell us a little bit about the work that you've been focused on, and what exactly you in your role is doing to help shape the combating of election integrity or misinformation, and what are some of the things that have happened over the recent years that have led to the development of this crisis?
Thank you. Yes, it works. Thank you very much for the question, and also for inviting me today and giving me the possibility a little bit to talk about my work, the work of my team, and the work of the EIS and in this context. As you mentioned, I worked in a division in the European External Action Service, so which is the pretty much the diplomatic service of the EU, working in a division that focuses on foreign information manipulation and interference, FIMI. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. Maybe I can highlight for the sake of the discussion the main elements of it, and information integrity. Our work in the EIS has started pretty much 10 years ago, following Russia illegal annexation of Crimea, when actually member states, the Council, gave us the mandate to focus on strategic communication and the disinformation around this event that was coming from Russia. Obviously, as you can imagine, during the last 10 years, contexts have changed multiple times, and so our work has evolved, and the mandate also has changed from member states, and we have built over the year task forces focusing on specific geographical areas such as Western Balkans, MENA region, most recently Sub-Saharan Africa Task Force, and Eastern Partnership, of course, being one of the first. And currently, today, my team, I'm part of the policy team, is composed by a group of data scientists and data analysts. As you know, or you probably don't know, but we do work a lot on detection, analysis of what we call FIMI threats. We have a team of that covers the European civilian missions and operations abroad. And we have a team that specialize on the threat actors. And for us, according indeed to our mandate, the threat actors the FIMI threat actors that we are focusing on are China and Russia. So FIMI, we came up with this concept because we thought that the concept of disinformation actually was not enough to define this problem. FIMI, of course, the F stands for foreign. We have the External Action Service, so we look at foreign actors, how they target the EU, and so with these activities. But also we look at we don't look at content. because indeed for several reasons, including as, we don't want to, our work is not to establish what is true, what is false, and so on, but we really look at the behavior of these actors online. We look at behavior activities that are coordinated and are manipulative in their character, and indeed they have, so they are not just happening organically online. And using these evidences by this, but a methodology that we have developed over the year, we are able indeed to look at this, to really frame this coordination, and therefore sometimes we're also able to link it to the strategic goals of these actors, or policy goals, or and so on and so forth. So this is a little bit the concept of FIMI, and of course, as you can imagine, threat actors, they use a wide variety of tactics to manipulate the online discourse, from creation of video-based content to posting across several social media to, for example, another important technique used that you mentioned, a couple of networks, activities that are more famous, such as doppelganger networks or others. They impersonate, for example, real proper media outlets, and we have seen these networks and this type of activities particularly active during elections, during national elections, but including during the European elections in 2024. And perhaps maybe a little bit, I'll give you also a context of our work in the context of elections, and therefore the 2024 European elections. We have actually our work around election. It's really building on this research we're doing through so situational awareness, but also raising awareness and cooperation, of course, with member states in different fora and with the other European institutions. This applies particularly during the 2024 European elections. We published 2 years ago a report, the second FIMI threat report, with which we have come up with, let's say, the main trends of how these actors actually operate around elections, which I will, quickly mention. And what we have noticed is that indeed the disinformation, the FIMI activities around election, doesn't just start when the voting is ongoing, but actually starts months in advance. According to our research, is about 6 months in advance, something like that, and it builds up, it increases over the time, reaching its peak, of course, 1 month before the voting, but the real peak, the most important moment for us is the 72 hours preceding the vote, or the days right after the vote. And also, speaking of main trends of how FIMI actors behave around elections, what is their focus? So as you can imagine, there are a couple of activities that they are recurrent. For example, discouraging the vote and the trust in the voting system. So also targeting, for example, the actual infrastructure. For example, this comes with cyber-enabled activities, but also the targeting of political candidates, the personal attacks to candidates and or political parties, and generally, of course, trust in democracy. So these are a little bit the main findings of our work and what we focus on around election.
Thank you very much. That was incredible. I have one quick question for you before we get to Jonas. You mentioned that we have this hyper-focus on Russia, and I'm going to direct this to everybody at some point, but I'm going to ask you first, because this is a bit of what you guys focus on with FIMI. Are there other actors who you're watching out for? And if you could, I imagine that that China is involved, but I would like to hear from the context of FIMI, who are some of the other actors that we're looking at beyond just Russia? Because we're so hyper-focused on Russia, and obviously there's great importance to focus on Russia, but there are other, like, we cannot lose sight of the fact that there are other major bad actors out there. So who are some of the people some of the organizations, some of the countries, state sponsors, whatever it may be, that you guys are focused on as well?
Yeah, so actually, as probably I should have clarified earlier, when we look at FIMI, we look at state and their proxies and their allies. So when it comes to Russia, it's not just, of course, the Kremlin and Russia, but it's also their proxies. We look at all the, let's say, what we call the Russian FIMI network infosphere. So all the channels that are, by proxies and sort of align with Russia in this sense. As I mentioned earlier, another threat actor that we focus on is China. Maybe I can say a couple of words on that as well. We have been working on that as well. So China is a bit of a different FIMI actor compared to Russia. Obviously, as we all know, the strategic, the geopolitical objectives of the countries are different, so obviously this is also in this field, and often actually as actors their interest and their activities also gets sort of aligned or reinforce itself. We have noticed this as well. But by saying this, of course, there are many other actors active in the infosphere, sometimes more, let's say, more on a permanent basis, and sometimes, of course, with disinformation is actually something that is triggered by big events, such as elections, for example, wars, or any big event, big meetings, and so on. So obviously, there's also actors that get mobilized around that, specifically ad hoc, but we do not have the ability to cover everything that is happening in the infosphere. So also the results of our studies that I mentioned in the FIMI threat report, they're limited in this sense. There is a limited number of cases upon which we draw these conclusions, obviously, and the actors that we cover are the actors that we are mandated by the council to cover. It doesn't mean there are other active actors. There are, obviously, we are aware of that, but our political work focuses in this sense.
Thank you. Jonas Shirovakta. Is that good? Better?
I can live with it.
That didn't look very good. I'll keep trying.
Well, no worries. We have like 1 hour for the panel, so I think that you will get pretty close by the end, so no problem there. Good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be here at this kind of distinguished forum. I am affiliated with Institute of International Relations in Prague, and I was working as a researcher of the Reclaim project. And in more depth, some things I will be kind of speaking about, you can read in our Reclaim policy brief, which should be somewhere around. So definitely kind of pick it up and read through that. So from my side, I might do like few general remarks that kind of allow us to kind of frame a debate a bit, and then kind of hopefully inspire some discussion. So first remark would kind of go into, let's say, my understanding of why we are even having this debate about kind of FIMI and disinformation and so on. And for me, it all kind of goes to this kind of let's say, systemic crisis of international order, when basically we are kind of seeing decline of kind of unipolar power of United States and kind of other powers are emerging. And in fact, I would argue that from that we are moving from the historical anomaly to something like historical normality, when this kind of competition of like different interests, but also kind of different ideas and different kind of ways of conducting policy and even kind of understanding the values that are important and should be kind of guiding lives, that's actually something like pretty normal, pretty standard. And obviously there are like multiple different means through which you can make this competition, and information space is one of them. So I think that we should not in that sense kind of try to treat FIMI, disinformation, propaganda as something separate, but always try to understand in context, okay, what is kind of overall strategic goal of the given actor. And when we kind of moving into this more competitive environment, maybe to kind of bit already addressed what the moderator was asking about is, that now we are obviously kind of focusing on Russia, and if we are in Baltics, we are focusing very much on Russia, but if in the case we are Portugal, or in the case that we are Denmark, and we are kind of thinking about how to protect Greenland, we are maybe thinking about completely different threat actors that can be around and against which we kind of have to be ready. And obviously European Commission is not tasked like with all these let's say areas, as it was already mentioned, but from the perspective of nation states, obviously this threat can look like very differently. Also, when we are kind of thinking about FIMI, I think that we should not think about it kind of in something that is kind of limited in the, let's say, time, only say, okay, there is FIMI related only to the election, but more kind of understand FIMI as a kind of continuous process, and kind of understand that, on the one hand, sure, it's true that there is preparation, like, if you kind of want to influence election, you kind of get into influencing in time, like 6 months before the election, but in fact you kind of want to be there like 6 years ahead and kind of be present in the information space, kind of cultivate the amplifiers and be kind of able to kind of shape the debate. So again, like we should take a more long-term approach. And then obviously it's for us as for kind of liberal or like democracies that are based on the kind of freedom of expression and like, and like freedom of speech and kind of competition of ideas, I think it's quite interesting challenge actually how to square this. That basically at the one hand we kind of want to keep this very precious thing kind of present, but at the same time we kind of have to kind of consider like how that kind of square with these kind of attempts of outside actors to kind of gain influence in my information spaces. And again, this open question, I think that we can have kind of case-by-case debate, like what is acceptable and what isn't, and we might have different opinions even here among experts represented on the panel. Other point that I wanted to make kind of related to kind of internal techniques and kind of mindset of specifically kind of Russian propagandists or like people who are kind of working on FIMI activities in Russia. I would highly recommend here the study called Beyond Doppelganger that was published by Swedish Psychological Defense Agency, because the problem we are having as researchers with analysis of FIMI operation is that we are like archaeologists, that we find a bone and we are then kind of thinking, okay, so is it a leg or is it a wing or was it a horn, and then we kind of try to construct the whole dinosaur from it. And that's kind of similar when you kind of look at one particular piece of this information and then to try to kind of fit it, and based on it kind of construct what's the overall kind of idea about the whole information operation. And luckily, like the Swedish colleague had the possibility to kind of access the internal communication that was kind of ongoing within one of these bodies that was tasked by Russian state to kind of conduct information operation in the social networks of the kind of member states. And based on that, they were kind of able to construct very interesting and very complex kind of idea about how these people are kind of actually operating, how they are thinking about their work and so on. And to be frank, it was not that different from the way I am kind of imagining like PR company is working. So, don't think about Russian FIMI as something like super mysterious and something super sinister. This is something that these people are kind of, trying to orient themselves in the information space similarly as everybody else, but with the important exception is that they are kind of having way larger resources and they are kind of thinking on the kind of long-term scale. And in that sense, when we kind of think about solutions, I would suggest that when we try to how to, let's say, regulate FIMI, we also, in context of election, we should also kind of try to think or like have to have a discussion about how current like political campaign is going and what we kind of allow political parties to do and what we think is already kind of unacceptable in our democracies, because again, like activities of domestic politicians and activities of some of the bodies of Russian propaganda are not that different in principle or in kind of technique. And last point that I would like to make, which I think might be sometimes overlooked, is that it's important not only to have the debate about the FIMI, but also have the debate that is kind of responsible and really kind of fact-based, because sometimes there is kind of a lot of we need kind of fact-checking and we kind of need these kind of real facts and so on, and then at the same time you kind of see a lot of kind of not entirely correct or not completely evidence-based kind of claims that are actually present in the debate about FIMI itself. And here I think that we as researchers have kind of great responsibility to really kind of talk about only things that we are kind of sure that were kind of proven, or be kind of very open about things which we are simply not able to, not able to demonstrate or not able to kind of substantiate with the evidence. And especially in the context of election, I think this is becoming crucial, right? Because what I see in Czech Republic right now is kind of this tendency to be like part of the political spectrum that might be, let's say, is very quick to label everyone who they don't like as kind of pro-Russian fifth columnists. And this obviously is not helpful at all for the legitimacy of the election kind of after the fact, in case these political forces kind of lose. And also it's, I think, in the end kind of divisive, because you kind of look at your fellow citizen as somebody who kind of came to some conclusions based on their kind of interest or kind of let's say, rational evaluation of situation, but you are kind of thinking, oh, these are some sort of brainwashed mass of people who are kind of manipulated by Russian propaganda. And I don't think that's correct at all, and I don't think that's kind of helpful for like electoral integrity, which is something we are talking here at this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonas. Ben, before we get to you, I'm going to point this question to you toward your last point. However, I would like for all of you to comment if you would like to, and that is my butt ringing. And that goes to a question that I kind of listed for all of you in our preparation, which was essentially, a couple of years ago, so in the aftermath of the 2016 election, and as in the US, as we were about, I apologize for making this US focused right now, but it goes to the context of what you were just talking about. In the aftermath of the 2016 election, and in preparation of the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, as it related to the Russia investigation, as we call it in the US, I have a San Francisco-born mother who's very, very liberal, and a rural Pennsylvania father who's like a Reagan conservative. And I can remember as that was developing, there was this argument going on at the dinner table, as would commonly happen in my household, after I came up from my apartment one day. And as they were going back and forth, all I could think to myself was, Jesus, this is the conversation that Russia wants right now. They want to try to break these democracies from within. They want this back and forth to be happening. And for us, it's not abnormal for this argument to be happening within my family, but it played out on such a grand scale within the United States, where this became this major back and forth and this pointing of fingers and who is pro-Russian, and there's a pro-Russian president, and all I could think to myself, and I had a friend at the time who was then a U.S. senator, then a Republican U.S. senator, not a very pro-Trump guy, left office, but he made the point. I remember one night I had dinner with him, and he was thinking, as they were going through the impeachment trials, this is it. This was the end game for Russia at the time. It wasn't about making anyone president. From what he understood it as it was an information campaign in order to try to break the U.S. from within and cause division. And I think that's a really key point that you bring up. So do you think that is more of the intention and the goal and the strategy of Russia at this time and over the past couple of years? Or has there been more of a push towards supporting people that may have more pro-Russian views or policies that they want to hold within Europe?
Well, I think that these are not mutually exclusive, right? It's not that kind of Russia would say, okay, like this is one thing we want to achieve, but they are kind of trying multiple different things, some of them like very kind of unlikely to succeed or even possibly kind of to backfire, but they just kind of trying, and then they kind of trying and see what happens. And in some context, it can, you are kind of fine with kind of only kind of increase the polarization of society. In other contexts, you might have some useful candidate that you want really to kind of push for. So I think it really depends, and kind of strategy will kind of depends on the local context. But again, I think that important thing that we should not really underestimate how this polarization kind of can in the end also kind of benefit of kind of Russian interests.
Anyone else have anything to comment on that point before we move to Ben? Fulvia?
No, I think I agree a little bit with your assessment of this personal story, actually, in the sense that we see that definitely one of the main, let's say, tactics of Russia as a FIMI actor is to confuse, to create confusion online, and out of the confusion, as I mean, the other panelists mentioned, also to sow distrust, divide, and indeed eventually polarize. And that's probably the confusion, I would say, one of the main aspects that trickles down a series of other negative events, negative for democracies, of course, and also another important point during the elections contest, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah, here.
Well, I think you're right, and you're too. We don't study Russian tactics specifically, but of course you would want to promote some candidates you like, but also to attack the system. So in the European Parliament we have many different political groups, and what we see every day is how they discuss, they disagree on some things, they have debates, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. If you belong to some political groups, you will tend to win more often than lose, but it works a lot. And if you want to hurt it, you can attack the compromise, so they don't try to work together. And ideally, if you want to destroy democracy, you would have people screaming in corners instead of saying, okay, this is a problem, we all agree, let's solve it. And but of course, it's both. Right?
Yeah. And I think the screaming in the corners is a really, really good part. And I'll let you touch on this more, because I think the screaming in the corners aspect has been amplified by social media over the past 15 years. And Ben, you are a bit of an expert on social media as it relates to kind of, especially within the context of election interference. So without further ado, Ben Grimm-Jones. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Boyd, and thanks all. I think I couldn't agree more with what's been said. In order to craft an effective response, we need to have clarity about the problem. And post-truth is not just a state that we find ourselves in, it is a strategy. It is an aim as well. Part of it is, of course, driven by the information overload that we find ourselves in, but part of it is also the consequence of active attempts to divide and slice and dice our societies, because of course if people stop, if democracies turn in on themselves, who does that benefit? So we face the instrumentalization of freedom of expression to violate freedom of thought, and in order to fight that clearly, we need to not only have a clear sense, I think, of who our adversaries are, but to communicate that, in particular to those audiences that might be targeted by the tactics of FIMI that get deployed. Now, in my job as an elections consultant, I work across the globe trying to support countries and organizations to build their resilience against this sort of thing. And it's very interesting to see how much there is a need for that connectedness. You'll see tactics that are levied in one context that then reappear on the other side of the world. And if you are an election management body or a policymaker or a civil society organization in one country, you might be your point of reference for resilience is the previous election that happened in your country, in your context. And that's a problem, because this stuff evolves quickly. And actually, it might be that in order to properly understand the measures to take to increase that resilience, looking at the recent elections that took place in another country on the other side of the world might actually be a more proper starting point. So just a couple of points, and I'll try and be brief. I first just want to acknowledge how far we've come, notwithstanding the challenges on funding, the challenges on API accessing the data we need to understand information operations. So much progress has been made. I think it's sometimes easy to say, well, look, there's a lot of known unknowns. Yes, there's a lot of known unknowns, but we understand way more than we used to. There are such high-quality evidential reviews out there. Insights like the fact that realism isn't necessarily the most important factor as to whether or not people find disinformation compelling. That's not something that we clearly had a handle on 5 years ago. Now we know that things like who shared it, whether it was shared repeatedly, these sort of factors are actually more important. So we know a lot more now than we used to. And we've also started to develop frameworks and means of sharing this insight to enable a truly global, more harmonious response, which is necessary because increasingly information operations, in fact, typically they operate across multiple platforms. But AI has made that much easier, and it's also made it easier to conduct them transnationally. So things like the disarm framework, those of you who might be familiar with these common means that we've got in order to identify, and then even common repositories to share information operation incidents across groupings, which essentially in time will allow for the real-time identification and transnational categorization of these sorts of things. This is helping us get a much clearer global picture of the state of play. We also have great work which has been led at European level. We've got the FEMI ISAC, for example. Those of you who might be familiar with the Information Sharing Analysis Centre's work is doing some excellent work trying to sensitize about the different tactics that are deployed. But there's a challenge here. And the challenge is this. We're doing a lot of, the evidence suggests that we need that just rebutting and just countering things is not necessarily the best way to take people with us. It's like if you're in a castle under siege. You can't just respond by building more shields. At some point you need to take new ground. And that's where the conversation needs to go now. And it was so encouraging, I think, reading the Reclaim policy briefs earlier. This idea that it is about reclaiming something. It is about taking something back. How can we win hearts and minds? How can we dry up the very oxygen on which information manipulators feed? How can we inspire with a vision of democracy which doesn't allow the room for this sort of anomic gravitation towards the narratives of our adversaries? This is where I think we need to go to make meaningful progress.
Thank you. You mentioned something that I'm just going to toss right over to you, Sarah, and that is, and you can touch on this at any point as you're going through your bit here, but in the fighting back is difficult, I think, because what you'll have is, and I think we saw a bit of a response to this with the Romanian election, despite the fact that the far-right pro-Russia candidate did not come through in the end there was a bit of a pushback in terms of what could be created by saying, no, this first round of voting is out, it's done, we need to move on, and we need to do this again. You almost create a momentum and an animosity, I think, sometimes. And one of the questions that I wanted to point towards you, and the reason I want to kick this to you, Sarah, is that what do you find in terms of the communication strategies needed from the institutions here in Brussels in order to combat some of these issues without having a heavy hand and without making it seem like, for lack of a better word, almost this authoritarian, no, we're right, you're wrong. Because this is where I think that people who might be susceptible to some of the interference messaging that's out there might say, well, you're doing exactly what they're saying you're going to do. So I think that's one of the hardest things to navigate from someone in a position like yours, or Fulvia in a position like yours. I think, so I'd be curious as you're going through some of your opening about how to counter that.
Thank you. So the question, how can we counter it without trying to...
what are the communication strategies that you can use and that to navigate dealing with the fallout in the pushback, right? Within the pushback that Ben's mentioning, and trying to move, not just create the shields, but actually gain ground. And gaining ground and can sometimes have repercussions negatively, I think. So that's kind of where I was going with.
Okay. So thank you for that, and thank you all for coming and for this event. Just to give you some context who I am, I work in the Communications Department of the European Parliament. It's a very large communications department because everything we do, we need to do it in 24 languages and for 27 countries. My team works, it's a small one compared to the size of the whole communications department. We focus on information integrity. And of course, we prepared a lot for the elections in June last year. And just a bit of the countering and also to reclaim what we try to keep the focus like that. Most of our work we want to dedicate to our messages ahead of the elections. We wanted to tell citizens, use your vote, right? It's important to vote. This is at stake. And also tell them, use your vote. If you don't, someone else will decide for you. So this is where we spend most of the time. Of course, in our team, we also looked at some monitoring and resilience building, countering in some case, and very important was also to work with other actors. As most of you probably know, elections are national, so we had 27 different elections to the same parliament, and as the EU we could support and complement and above all give a kind of EU perspective. We could not say we are the specialists on elections in Lithuania or Greece, but we could see the trends, and as you said, what was very useful for I think all of us was to exchange information ahead. So we saw in national elections, for instance, narratives about election fraud were spread from one country to another. Okay, then we could prepare for it. We also saw good examples how some member states had more information, like answering to this, about election technicalities. It was nothing we talked about a few years ago, but when people are confused, how do I vote? Is it a text message? If you use your phone, is it by a paper? How should it look? We started to communicate a bit more on that. So a bit more about the elections. So as we had prepared for and expected, we saw much more disinformation around the elections. But as far as we could see, and this is, I think, a joint EU conclusion, none of these attempts were able to actually threaten the integrity of the EU election. And this is largely thanks to the hard work of fact-checkers, civil society organizations, journalists, platforms, and the political candidates themselves, and of course thanks to new EU legislation and the cooperation. What we did on EU level was, of course, to share information, so we wouldn't only think about the elections 5 years earlier, but we could think about elections a few weeks earlier or a few months earlier, and to have multiple exercises with different teams preparing for all kinds of scenarios and make sure we had like the right names in our phone books if worse things happen. And this, as you said, it might seem super basic, but 5, 6, 7 years ago, we didn't know who to contact where for this. To complement, as Parliament administration, we had some trainings for the members, for staff. We had the special election integrity section on our public website in all languages. And we had heard also a way to make people stronger is to inform them about common techniques, so to pre-bunk some techniques. So we produced, and we are still doing this, some videos in all languages about common techniques, like polarization, like taking things out of context, or trying to silence certain voices. So we could like empower citizens to recognize, and of course we also had a lot of events online in Brussels, Strasbourg, and in different parts of all EU countries to tell citizens, teachers, journalists, other people interested in what is this information, how can I recognize it, what can I expect, what do I do, and how am I supported. And then, well, we had the elections. 1 year has passed. We have another geopolitical situation. We have other challenges. AI is moving, and so on. But what keeps is our goal to protect fundamental values like freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, the right to information, and that information manipulation is a threat to that. The members, the newly elected, it's a new team. Half of the members are newly elected, and what is clear is that disinformation and election integrity is very close to their hearts. We had a debate in December. We think it's the longest one ever in Parliament's history about disinformation on online platforms and the consequences for elections. It lasted for 5 hours, and we had 100 members participating. We have a plenary session 1 or 2 every month, and in almost every one of them there has been one debate or resolution discussing the topic. So it's very important to the members. They have set up actually a special committee to look into and prepare for the Democracy Shield, which is an initiative coming in the end of this year. And the member of parliament in charge of it, he just published a kind of pre-report, a working document, and it had a special section on protecting elections, where he insisted on everything from protecting electoral infrastructure to the physical security of the candidates and the importance of networks so we can exchange information. This will then end up in a report to be published in a few weeks, and then voted with amendments end of the year, and finally by the full House in January. Members also are looking closely at some of the new EU laws being adopted in the last term, like the Digital Services Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, and the Media Freedom Act, and they have a special implementing working group, so looking at studying, are they implemented the way we intended, or do we need something else? And as an institution, the European Parliament is, of course, mostly interested in defending parliamentary democracy and in the threat as society as a whole, against society as a whole. But we also see that we are targeted. So some of the examples we've seen recently, we've seen since the elections, is to try to say that there is a kind of censorship going on against minority voices. We have, for instance, seen how, also again, super technical thing, like how do we allocate speaking time during plenary debates have been misused. Small clips have been taken out of context to say actually minority voices are silenced, but I mean they get speaking time like everyone else. We, of course, many members are directly targeted with false claims, direct attacks or threats. Around this special committee looking into the Democracy Shield, it was a kind of funny twist, or not so funny in the beginning of the year, where they said, well, actually this is not just a committee preparing a report that will include recommendations, but instead it's a kind of new EU superpower with this committee would have the right to look at national elections and cancel or change those. It isn't like it's complete nonsense. And how did we communicate against it? Of course, it doesn't help if we say it's not true that, because then we spread it much more. But we had to, especially in Spain, where this was very strong with our colleagues in Madrid, we communicated more. This is the role of a special committee. This is what it will do. And not saying so much what it will not do, to have a kind of public truth there. And ironically, same kind of disinformation also say that Parliament is completely useless and powerless. So it's a bit what we discussed earlier. You try it all, right? Maybe someone is open to the overpowerful Parliament and others to the useless. And of course, what we see disinformation actors use the fact that Parliament is open and transparent. We have votes and meetings, debates, they are accessible online to everyone. So you can pick and choose if you want to make a weird story. And people see compromise in action. So you see the minority, the majorities, how they work. And this is very good, but of course it's something people can misuse. Our conclusion as the communications department is that we need to explain clearer and more convincingly than before how democracy functions and how we defend it for manipulative behaviors, that what is the threat, what we do, and what everyone can do. And also to be clear to defend what is a democracy, what is a parliament, and to say this compromise making or transparency, it's not a weakness, it's a strength, and this is how a democracy works compared to other kind of systems. Thanks.
Thank you very much. As someone who's worked in the communications department at some point in my life, I often say that it is a thankless no-win job sometimes, and I think that you summarize that, it becomes very hard to pull, you sit in the middle and pull both ways to try to describe issues and describe solutions to them, but then also there can be a tough time providing the framework for it without having that, and also getting that pushback at the same time. This is very interesting stuff. Thank you to all of you guys. Check to see where we are with time. We have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to quick run through a few questions that I wanted to have, and I'll point it at one of you, and if anyone else wants to talk real quick, but give it a couple minutes and then we'll kick it over to the audience for some Q&A. Quick, I want to just discuss the role of social media in shaping narratives, whether false narratives, and what they can do in shaping electoral outcomes. It's obviously been a major point. I think that it is pretty much the basis of the onslaught of misinformation as we see it in election interference in these modern times. What exactly can be done? And Jonas, I'll start with you. What exactly can be done with social media in order to I think we understand what the problems are and how it's been utilized, and obviously we saw with Romania how TikTok was utilized in promoting misinformation within that first election there in November. What can be done to counter it using social media? Are there benefits to the social media? Because oftentimes I see that there might be no benefit to social media. Give us hope when it comes to that front.
Oh, well, I mean, now we kind of open all other issue, because I would actually argue that social media are not such a great problem. And actually, that what we kind of are still I think that sometimes we tend to kind of overemphasize them. That when you kind of look at the various channels from which people are taking their information, you might still find out that there is a significant percentage of people, for example, in Czech Republic, who doesn't have social media, let's say, as a kind of big online platforms. They are basically don't use them, and this is not their source of kind of information. So I think that we have to be a bit more nuanced here, also kind of have a bit more nuanced conversation, social media are not one basket, Facebook is something different than TikTok, then you might have what actually defines social media, right? And then when you kind of look at, and we had this kind of discussion at the previous panel, actually, that you might have a lot of people who are kind of following social media, but at the same time are very, following them in very somewhat responsible way, in a way, to kind of look at them and say, okay, I kind of have them for fun, but these are not kind of source of information. I filter through what I kind of see there. So again, I am, I don't give you any one answer what to do with social media. I would just to be kind of very cautious to make some kind of big conclusion with social media are the biggest problem. We should have more kind of nuanced discussion that it's possible to do in 1 minute in which I wanted to answer this.
Ben looks like he wants to jump in, but Jonas is not a fan of shutting down social media, as I kind of want to sometimes in my life. So
perhaps 3 quick things on this, tangible things that can be done. number one, early risk assessment. Okay, don't turn up when the election. I mean, Fulvio rightly mentioned earlier that, and the data is very clear on this, that information operations tend to intensify within the 72 hours before election day, as a general rule, through to the end of the process. And equally, freedom of expression, freedom of thought are not built overnight. So we need to combine that focused approach with getting coalitions together early, across different political parties, civil society, and sensitization of those coalitions about what the emerging tactics are. I did a project some time back where we got everybody in the room 18 months before the election, and it was fantastic because it was early enough that people were actually able to take tangible measures to increase resilience. Number two, identify key data gaps, remedy them. Some of the work we did in Taiwan in advance of their elections that I worked around. We had a fantastic insight, which was basically that it was pointed out that there was no data on who people actually trust, or no good data on who people trust within Taiwan. And so some of the organizations there did some polling and worked out that actually the most trusted group in Taiwan was academics. And that was really helpful to then share that insight with different civil society organizations who were able to channel fact-based messaging accordingly. So identifying data gaps can be really powerful. And thirdly, intervene early in the kill chain. So if you think of an information operation, right, we all see it when it's on, suddenly it's on social media, but there's actually a lot of series of steps that leads to that. So I'm thinking, for example, Ghana closing down bot farms, well in advance of their elections. I'm thinking, for example, of a report from the Center for Information Resilience, which came out, I think, just 2 days ago, which has documented how pro-Russian money is coming into Moldova. I think through what's called a stable coin, which is a cryptocurrency in Kyrgyzstan, through which that money is entering the international financial system and then being channeled through to Moldova for political purposes, it seems, according to the report. So that's a sort of tangible thing that you can actually disrupt that. Governments can actually act on that sort of thing, making it difficult for those who are involved in these operations to travel, expanding sanctions registers. There's huge difference in EU and US and UK and other sanctions registers, trying to make these more ambitious. So anybody who knows if they get implicated in this stuff, they're not going to be able to go and retire to a Greek island. They're not going to be able to go on their summer holiday to France. There's going to be these tangible consequences for a much larger set of individuals if they get involved in this sort of thing. So these are the sort of very practical steps to make these operations more difficult, to make the costs higher, and we get there by starting with incentives.
And just to add an example, what we do around every plenary session, we tend to invite a group of very successful content creators from the different EU countries for like 1 or 2 day seminar in Brussels or Strasbourg, where they learn how Parliament works, how democracy works, and depending on the week, different topics. And we often have a session on disinformation, and what I discover when I talk to them is they are very, very different backgrounds. Some are trained journalists and they're using TikTok to reach out to new audience. Others come from completely different area and they are just waking up to, democracy, it's important. And the discussions we have with them and what they have with each other is a way to work with the good sides of social media and with the content creators. Thanks.
Do you have anything you wanted to add?
I think I would like to reinforce actually one point. Maybe we shifted a little bit the answers here on the response side, nicely so, I want to say. A very important part indeed. Over the years, I think we have progressed a lot on what we call the situational awareness side, the knowledge about FEMI, about threat actors. I think what we honestly can say that we still have a lot of work to do on the response side, and definitely probably guiding principle could be, or even should be, imposing this extra cost to threat actors, or trying to at least. But I do think that actually continuing raising awareness and having more information about the threat, and we published a lot of reports, but not only us, also civil society. For example, I just wanted to give you this example. Doppelganger was exposed by, by actually NGOs, showing, how important is this work in this field. No institutions, no government could do this alone. A couple of years ago was exposed, and now we know there were leaks. So actually, we know a fair lot about this operation by the Kremlin. Did it stop? Not really. Right, it's continuing to be activated on and off when elections when there are some elections, but we might argue about the effectiveness of it. I don't know. Some countries have argued that yes, indeed, Doppelganger was very active in our country, but we have not observed a very much appeal success. Perhaps, I don't know. Also working on this, creating more capacity in the society and awareness on this might have helped. I don't know. I don't think there are studies, or we don't have data to give a final answer on this yet. But I think working towards imposing extra cost to actors, to female actors, is definitely what we should do.
Thank you. Real quick, if I determine whether I ask one more question or not, show of hands if any who has questions. 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to ask any more questions. You guys can help.
Thank you, Boyd. Shada Islam, a journalist and op-ed writer. It's not a question, but it's a suggestion. Talking about disinformation, misinformation, all the stuff you've talked about, a lot of that happened when Zoran Mamdani won the Democratic primary in New York. So my suggestion to all of you is that you also learn a lesson about good communication, skills of actually the person standing, for elections, rather than just talking about disinformation, because that man, against all odds, did win this Democratic primary and could be the next mayor of New York. So there's a real-time, real-live example of how to actually, stand up to misinformation, disinformation, by being an authentic politician. Just a suggestion.
It certainly wasn't upset. I looked at the polling data a couple days ago, and for a living, I'm sad to say that I look at polling data and I got that one terribly wrong. To beat the Cuomo machine in New York is no small feat. So it was really an impressive showing by him in his campaign.
Hello, it's Alvaro Leart. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the Free University of Brussels. I have a question maybe for Fulvia and for Ben, because you talked a lot about FIMI, and I'm, to be honest, skeptical about FIMI as a framework to meaningfully address threats to democracy, but say that, okay, FIMI is a meaningful framework. Why, when talking about FIMI, it's only about Russia and China? I mean, where are the US or Israel that are clearly as well undertaking some information operations also in Europe? Thanks.
Well, it's your theme.
Yes, it's true. Well, yeah, I mean, I would be actually interested to understand why you don't think this framework or concept of FIMI is not, helping in this regard. Actually, generally, would be interested, because I think if we can make it better. I mean, we're very much open to suggestions. So about other actors, well, I think the concept of FIMI as it is formulated, it can apply to any type of actors. It's a concept that draws a lot also on the methodology, on how it is implemented from cyber, so from years and years of experience. The concept per se, of course, maybe rather newish, but indeed a little bit maybe the technical parts behind they draw from experts in the field. About the other actors, well, as I said, this can be applied to all the actors, even to what we would call DIMI, meaning internal, let's say, actors, so internal in a country, domestic actors. I think, probably countries or member states, since we are in Europe, they do that. They might apply the same to their domestic problems. Obviously, as a service, we cannot look at everything. We have a political mandate, and we need to respond to that. But I think actually the concept is flexible enough. Should the political mandate, political wish change to cover other actors? And as I said, the fact that we don't talk about it doesn't mean we're not aware. But of course, with the limited resources and with the mandate that we have currently, that's what we do.
Just briefly to add, if I may, I think I understand the critique. I understand where that's coming from. I think there's also, I think, a question of, it's not about singling out any particular actor. It's about looking at the information landscape, looking at what we know, and trying to understand, where is this stuff coming from? And in some cases, United Front information operations are almost as old as the CCP itself. The Russian disinformation to try and, or Russian information manipulation to try and divide, the Ukrainian-Polish bilateral relationship, for example. This is decades old. So it's not like we've just sort of woken up and said, oh, hey, let's pick on particular countries in our identification of an information threat. I think we are responding to the very real consequences, a challenge that presents itself to us.
Hi, so someone had mentioned that we have to help combat disinformation and misinformation. One of the things that we should do is that we have to identify the most trusted group in a society. And I was just wondering, what do we do if the most trusted group in a society is either inherently biased, peddles disinformation themselves, or is generally untrustworthy? What do we do then?
Anyone want to tackle that one?
It's probably a bit too late, isn't it, at that point?
I'm sorry, I just asked a really hard question.
Yeah, well, no worries. I mean, that's actually finally we kind of get some kind of, let's say, brain exercise over here, right? Look, I don't feel that it will ever happen. That because you don't have like the most trusted group in the society, because the society is not like monolithic, right? That you have like multiple, let's say, opinion leaders among like different groups within the society, and then you can kind of use those like as a kind of your intermediaries to like to various groups. And again, then we also should have like this discussion about like about the, let's say, the topic of the communication, because at the same time, I mean, even though I appreciate this example that was given from the US, I'm not really sure how it kind of relates to something I'm interested about as the institutional communication, because communication of like, let's say, political ideas and political position from the standpoint of elected official is something different than what institutions are doing, and the set of topics about which the institutions can and should communicate will be like very different. So not like all tactics can be used. Of course, there might be overlap, but not necessarily. But to kind of get to your question, for example, when I'm thinking about like very practical kind of example, like for example, you have like some natural catastrophe coming, and you kind of need to kind of approach the community, and here I can kind of imagine that there will be kind of common ground even for people who kind of, as you say, might be kind of like prone to disinformation about some, let's say, ideological topic, they might have kind of interest to protecting their community against floods, for example. Hence, you kind of have a common ground since you find a common interest with them, even though ideologically you have like no chance of kind of discussions. But again, that's kind of more broader discussions, how we kind of keep our societies together, and keeping our societies together, I think, should not be only about like, or should not be at all about one ideology, but should be kind of more about kind of common interest in kind of survival and not kind of killing each other.
I think one answer is to have yeah? Oops, sorry. No? It works, yeah. No, you need informed and critically thinking citizens. If we think society a few hundred years back, the best experts said Earth is flat, right? So it's quite likely there is something we are wrong about now. We have these events for young people, so 16 to 18-year-olds, where they play to be members of parliament for a day. And last year we had this discussing disinformation, and they should suggest ideas, and there were two of them, and in both cases they kind of suggested a kind of ministry of truth, which in a way we can understand, because if you're 16 you have so many other things to think about, like your future, the person you're secretly in love with, you know, how can I survive without my parents, so to also fact check, you know. So we had experts and leading members trying to explain to them, don't even trust us blindly. You need to be critical. But it was tough. The first group we could convince. The second one, they said, well, I think we still want all facts webpage, right? So no, but we all need to look at it to we see the wrong things we believe today that we do better in the future.
George Orwell rolling over in his grave. Anybody else? Other questions?
Just chip in on that one very briefly.
Oh, yeah.
Just to say that I think it's also not static. It was a great question actually, but you know, the trust can be built from, you know, so if those, you know, trusted in, if reliable institutions are not trusted in a society, of course, you know, you can look at, well, why is another actor trusted, and then you understand that. That doesn't mean using the same tactics as those who want to, you know, spread information manipulation, but it does mean perhaps understanding why they might be more trusted in a particular context, and maybe acting on that. And I actually think that's quite a nice, you know, strategic end goal to work towards, this idea of a shared set of institutions, a shared source of reality. You know, to say that actually where do we want to be with this in, you know, 10, 15 years, having that shared set of sources which can command a degree of trust from across society, I think is quite a nice strategic goal.
Olaf from University of Iceland. I'll come back from the grad questions to something very specific, maybe to end this. So you keep mentioning the speed with which the techniques and the actors may be changing from one election to the other. So could you maybe talk about the specific case of the Romanian elections, and the first one and the second one, both in terms of whether you saw differences in the types of manipulation that were enacted, and also in the responses that were taken, given the large level of popularity and discussions about this? Thanks.
That wasn't my answer.
I believe you stumped the panel.
Oh, you should have a Romanian in the panel. Sorry.
I think we are following Jonas's advice to talk about things that we are qualified to address. No, it didn't work.
It's a very interesting question. I'm not going to answer it. I think it's a very interesting question, though, because especially given the outcomes of both of those two elections, so what changed in the interim, what different things were done, I think that's worth something to explore, but it doesn't look like this panel is going to hit it. One last question. We are over time now, but go ahead.
Yeah, because my question was related to the Romanian case, so
yes.
Maybe I can say something just in my question.
All right. Well, if we jump over the couches and hide behind them,
it's very quickly, because I think this case shows the complexity of the topic. because from these lenses of disinformation, we are addressing many different problems for democracy. So in the case of Romania, what happened is, first they showed that there was a foreign campaign and it was Russia, etc., behind these things. But at the same time, there was an internal problem of not respecting the internal rules of financing of the campaigns. And this was the intervention through TikTok. And this was another thing, and another way of controlling what is happening with this information. That is, TikTok didn't show that it was propaganda. And so it was a candidate that didn't respect the internal rules. And the third question, and I finish with this, very, very important, because it's one of the problems related to democracy, that in Romania they say they are defending some ideas that are not allowed from our constitution, so they are really trespassing some limits on the political pluralism allowed in democracy. And this is what is happening, for example, we had in the elections of Germany, that now, well, should we forbid some positions or not in the elections? So we cannot answer. And we can just analyze it, not just from the FIMI perspective or the perspective of, because it's a kind of mixture of different problems affecting democracy.
Yeah, I think your point there about there's this internal discussion within Romania, you're taking away our internal choice. That was kind of the question I was posing to Sarah earlier, because I think from a communications perspective, from a media strategy perspective, that's one of the hardest things to navigate, is when you are an outside institution and you're trying to inform, however you want to use the word, whether you're trying to inform a group of people within a country, the quick response is always going to be, you're not one of us. This is our inside voice. This is our decision to do. This is not your decision. And I think that's going to be one of the harder strategies to navigate, especially, again, I sympathize totally with your position from a communications standpoint as we kind of try to navigate all these issues going forward. I'm going to end it there. I thank you guys all for the great questions, even the ones that stumped us. I'd like to thank everyone up here on the panel. It was great getting the chance to kind of go back and forth. I actually have a ton more questions. We could have probably done this for another hour, but nonetheless, there is a schedule to stand by. So again, thank you to the audience. Thank you to the panel. I appreciate everyone's time.